Well, to start with, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Pete Kerns. I'm the Eugene Police Chief.
And so maybe you could explain your understanding of the situation with Eric Richardson's sister and son and the incident that happened on July 16th.
Sure. Well, what we know now in retrospect is something we don't have the benefit of in the moment. And what we know is that we don't know all these things, I should say. What we do know is that two professional and capable police officers were dispatched to one of the most complicated calls for service that our officers go to. And it's also one of the most common calls that we go to. And they went there with the best of intentions. And that was to help the people, the mom and the 19-year-old son, who were in need of emergency services. And we also know that now that mom it was in a situation that she couldn't entirely manage on her own, and that she was hoping to get Cahoots, didn't want police there, and that, which is always the case, she has a much higher level of understanding of the risk that her son poses. Police officers can't possibly know that until we arrive and we start to understand what it is that we're dealing with. But everybody was there trying to make the situation better, including the mom. They're trying to make the situation better for the mom and the 19-year-old son. And we know now that Eric was there, and his purpose was to be a witness to what was happening and to not interfere or become involved in what was happening and to help calm things down. Those are things that police officers never get to know before they show up. You know, we can't assume those things. Our officers have to be prepared for the worst, but to treat everything in a way that will help to ensure the best outcome. And responding to an incident with a full-grown, strong, athletic man who is in a mental health break and whose behavior is unpredictable, as you probably noticed in the audio that you listened to, is a very, very difficult thing to do. And so the officers should try to control as many of the variables as they can. And they endeavored to do that based on what we all know from the police reports and from the recordings that we've heard. So that's basically what I know going into this. The allegations of misconduct have been made about the level of force that was used on the son by the officers and the level of force that was used on Aisha, the mom. And so that's what we're experts at investigating. And that investigation hasn't been done. The intake has been done by the independent police auditor, who will monitor every aspect of the investigation. So when it's complete, we should have a very clear picture of exactly what happened, and I can lay those facts against our policy and our training to show whether or not our officers complied with that. So I'm really not in a position now. It would be inappropriate for me to make a judgment as to whether or not their actions were within policy at this point. But I essentially know what you know about it, maybe a little bit more, because we've heard a little bit from the police officers.
Do you think, do you think that overall officers are adequately trained and prepared for situations with people in mental health crisis?
Yeah, there is probably no level of training that would be enough because of how huge the challenge is, particularly when dealing with someone who's big and strong and their unpredictable nature. But we provide more training here than just about any police department in Oregon. 100% of our officers have been through the crisis intervention training, which is a 40-hour class that has been refined over many years here and originated out of Memphis, where it started probably 25 or 30 years ago. And we're developing refresher training for our officers, and I've asked that we develop specific training for supervisors, sergeants, and lieutenants that is uniquely designed for supervisors who show up and manage encounters like this one. The reality is that while we've been watching the funding to the criminal justice system in Lane County declined, what's also been declining sort of quietly is funding for behavioral health. 20 years ago, patrol officers occasionally, but not often, handled calls involving people in a mental health break. Now it's all day long, every day of the week, all hours of the day and night. Our officers are going to those calls. And in some cases, the people are armed. And every time we go into a household, there are weapons there that pose a threat. No matter whether the household has firearms in it or not, there's always kitchen knives and those kinds of things that pose a threat to officers. So these can be extremely dangerous calls for service. And so I worry for the welfare of the people that we're responding to and trying to help, and I worry for the safety of our police officers, which is why we spend so much time training on this subject.
Do you think that your officers were in danger in this situation?
Yeah, there absolutely is a level of danger with each of these, and in this case, they're on an elevated wooden porch with about a 4-foot tall railing, and so there wasn't a lot of room to maneuver, and they weren't able to control all the variables very well. Mom remained pretty close with her son, and that complicated what the officers could do. So yeah, there was a level of danger. We didn't have the report that there was a firearm, so that we knew that probably wasn't the case. Doesn't mean we can assume that that's true, but we rely pretty heavily on the information that the caller gives us, so we knew that. We didn't know, the officers, while in the struggle with the mom and the son, didn't know the intention of Eric. Eric had a very clear idea of what his intention is, but it's impossible for the officers to know that. They already have one family member that's clinging to the person that they're trying to take into custody. They have no way of knowing if the other family member will want to do the same thing, which would make their jobs even more difficult.
He does say, he does identify himself, and he does say something to the effect of, "I'm just here as a witness."
Yeah. Yeah, and that's good. It's better than not saying that. But the officers still don't know. I mean, we get all kinds of assurances from people who attack our officers just before they're attacked. The most common scenario is one where the officers go to a fight, alcohol-fueled fight somewhere downtown, and people want to videotape. And we don't mind that people are videotaping us. In fact, more video the better, usually, for the way that we conduct business here. But sometimes those people, we don't know what their intentions are. So we ask them to get back so that we have enough room to react if that person videotaping should turn on the officers. But what it means is that they have to watch the videotaper and they have to watch the person that they're fighting with. That's asking a lot of one person. So that's the situation these officers were in. They're dealing with a very unpredictable, strong man and a mom who wouldn't let go. And I understand why she wouldn't let go. And now a new arrival who may be saying reassuring things, but they still have to keep an eye on him, and they want to create enough distance. They ask him to create enough distance from them so that they have reaction time if he should decide he wants to be involved in the struggle too.
Do you think that this would have gone differently if the people concerned were not African American?
Well, that is one of the allegations, so we'll try to get to the bottom of that. As it is right now, I've read the reports, I've listened to the audio recordings. There's no indication that race was a factor, and that's the point of the investigation, to learn those kinds of things. That's a difficult and probably impossible thing to discern, though.
Do you think your officers were familiar with, when Eric Richardson shows up and he says, "I'm the president of the NAACP," do you think that they know what that means when they hear that?
Oh, I'm sure they know what the title means, but I doubt that they knew Eric Richardson.
And on that subject, he told me that his sister was arrested and taken to Lane County Jail, and that he actually contacted you, and that his what he says is that probably she would have been kept in jail, and perhaps the charges, because I understand that the charges have been dropped against her. Do you think the fact that that he knows you had anything to do with the fact that she was able to be released and that the charges were dropped? Or
No. The fact that the charges are dropped has nothing to do with my relationship with any of the parties involved in this. The prosecutor, the city's prosecutor, read the reports, made an independent decision about whether or not to charge Aisha while she was in custody, and then reviewed the reports again days later after the city's prosecutor had time to ensure that she had all the information she needed, and she made another independent decision. A person in my position has to be pretty careful to not only avoid being involved in decisions I shouldn't be involved in, but also to avoid the perception that I'm involved in decisions I shouldn't be involved in. And so I've told Eric the 2 times that he's brought that up in my presence that I did not make that decision. The prosecutor does that. I didn't ask the prosecutor to conclude one way or the other. She made that totally independently.
and do you think that it's right that obviously you're still doing the investigation, but that Aisha was arrested? Do you think that was the right move?
Well, the purpose of the internal affairs process is to determine whether or not, fundamentally, it's to determine whether or not the officers violated any policy. We may learn at the end of this that the officers did what they're trained to do, and that what they did was within policy, including the arrest and lodging Aisha. The other thing, that's the main function of an internal affairs process. The secondary function is to ask, are our policies the right policies, and should we be giving different guidance to our officers in circumstances like these, and should our training be different? And every time we have a fairly dynamic encounter like this one, we learn something that can be changed. It's important, I think, for all the parties to know and the community to know, if that were the outcome, and I'm not presuming what the outcome is, that our officers do a very good job of conducting business in the way that they've been asked to conduct it. And so it always concerns me that if we learn lessons from something, we blame the officers for not knowing what those new lessons are, when often they've done what we've trained them to do.
And just, do you see this as, whatever the results of the investigations are, do you see an opportunity here for, some possible change or some possible, way to affect policy or affect changing training that might help in the next situation that's similar?
Yeah, the nice thing, one of the good things about this is that the officers are smart, professional people. All the officers that were involved in this are smart, professional people that will have feedback from me on whether or not we're providing them with adequate guidance and direction in policy and training. And we have the benefit of Eric's observations and Aisha's experience and observations, which is rare when we get someone, smart people who see things from a different place than the police officers or the involved party do. And they'll be able to provide input that can inform what we do with our policy and our training. So that's good. The other good thing is that Eric is the kind of leader who wants to work together with us, despite what he has experienced in his opinion of it. And that's a huge thing for our police department, because what we know is that there are inadequate resources available for people in mental health crisis. I wish our officers weren't going to those calls. I wish someone who was uniquely trained for handling people in crisis. We're handling all those calls for service, and our officers instead were working on reducing crime and making Eugene safer from the criminal conduct that occurs.
So, I mean, if you imagine, I mean, if Cahoots were 24 hours a day, do you imagine this would have been a very different situation?
I'm not sure Cahoots, even if they were available, that they would have been dispatched. When you listen to that first 911 call, the son sounds pretty, it's hard to know what his behavior really is and if it would have been safe to send Cahoots operators to that one. So I'm not sure if they would have gone to this one. But our officers will be handling fewer calls involving people in behavioral health crisis if Cahoots is working 24 hours a day. And some communities have interdisciplinary teams that include police and mental health workers handling calls like this one. And their whole function is to resolve these with the lowest level of force and the best possible outcome. And hopefully Eugene can get to that place someday.
Okay.